Hello and welcome to this fourth demonstration in the series that we're doing on Windows 10 in the enterprise. So in the last demonstration we showed how to, or I showed how to prepare a reference computer using sysprep and how to capture the image on the reference computer using DISM. Um, I will continue with the same light, and this time around what we'll proceed to do will be to deploy the custom image that we've captured. Will be to deploy it using a tool by Microsoft called MDT. Now, MDT stands for Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. So what we'll do in this demonstration is we'll be installing MDT. So if I bring up diagram again, so now we are introducing another computer called Launch Client 6. So this is the computer that we'll be deploying our image to. This is the reference computer that we captured our image from. And now what we'll do is we'll put MDT on Launch Client 1, MDT 2013 on Launch Client 1, and then we'll use MDT to deploy the operating system that we captured from Launch Client 5, the custom image. We'll use it to deploy it to Launch Client 6. So let's get started with that. So right now I'm on Launch Client 1, and I already downloaded the MDT MSI file from Microsoft.com. Again, that's all simple to download. All you need to do is go on Google, type Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, and look for the latest version and download it. Which is what I've done here already. So I'll just double click on it to kick off the installation. So this is a really straightforward installation. We don't have lots of changes to make in the install process. So if I sense that any of these steps will be taking a while, what I'll do is I'll pause the recording and then I'll continue once it finishes that stage. So yeah, introduction, we click next to this. Standard installation accepts the agreement. We'll click next to that. I want to leave the setup. I want to leave the components that will be installed exactly the way they are. So I'll just click next to that. I want to join the program at this time. I'll click next to that and I'll click install, and that's really straightforward. And then that'll take a while to complete, and once it finishes I'll be back and then we'll continue with the process. Okay, the installation finished now. That took roughly about 3 to 4 minutes to finish. And so in next case, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and open MDT, something called the deployment workbench. So majority, not all, but majority of the work that you'll be doing with MDT will be done on something called the deployment workbench. So I'll find it under M here, under Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. I'll expand that and I'll see the deployment workbench here. So there are a few things that we'll need to do to begin with. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll create a deployment share, and after creating deployment share we add an operating system to a deployment share. I'll show you how to add drivers to a deployment share, even though we won't be using drivers in this particular demonstration because we're dealing with virtual machines. We're dealing with Hyper-V virtual machines in this case, but at least you have an understanding of how to do that if you ever need to do that. So the opening of the deployment workbench may take a while, being the first time, so I may pause the recording again and I'll come back once it finishes. Okay, so the deployment workbench just opened up now, and what I'll do is I'll expand the deployment share there. I'll right click on it and I'll click new deployment shares. Now, being that this is just a short demonstration, again, we're not doing an explanation in this series. That's a separate forum. And as a reminder for those who have not watched previous editions of the series, is if I bring this one back up. If you go on Google Plus and look for the community called MCSC Study Group. So in that, yeah, so this one. So in that particular in this particular community group, we meet together as frequently as possible to discuss different technologies, and that'll be the best forum where we can explain stuff and explain the theory behind different technologies and that. Okay, so I'll just leave the default as now. Typically, in your production environment, you probably want to customize these and make it more clearer to you, something that you can refer to later. This will create a share called deployment share on Learn Client 1, which you're currently working on. We'll leave that as the default. Again, you may want to customize this if you're in a production environment. There are certain options that we can accept. We'll just leave the default for now. We'll read the summary, we'll click next, and that begins the creation of the deployment share. So yeah, that didn't take long, and finish. So now we have the deployment share that we'll be working with. And the very first thing that we'll be doing is we'll be adding an operating system to this deployment share. Now remember that we captured a custom operating system from Learn Client 5 earlier. So that's what we'll be adding. So if I go under operating systems here, again, you probably want to keep this organized. If you're in a production environment, you probably want to create a new folder, call it Windows 10. So the folder is just to keep things organized. Import operating systems. So custom images what we're importing. If we're importing directly from the CD or DVD, I can add this, but we're importing a custom image.wim file. I'll go on the E lab files and install.wim. So now it's asking, do we need a setup file? So in this situation, I already have the Windows 10, the original ISO file mounted. So I'll select this option and I'll just select my D drive. So my D drive is just the CD drive that has the Windows 10 ISO image mounted. So I'll say copy the other files that you need for the deployment, copy them from this, because that's just the WIM file. So actually, if you look within your Windows 10 ISO file, enterprise, whatever it is, DVD, CD, typically be ISO that you download from your volume licensing center. So if you look under the sources directory here, you'll find the install.wim file, which is the Windows imaging format. So this is like the image that's going to be deployed. But then it uses all these other files during the setup process. So what we're supplying in this case is we're supplying a custom WIM file that will be deployed. But then we're saying get all the remaining files that you need from this DVD. So that's basically what we're doing here. So we've specified a custom WIM file here, and we're saying everything else that you need, get them from here. But again, I can't be pointing it to say get remaining files from a Windows 8 DVD. What it's saying is this has to match the version of the WIM file that you've specified earlier. So this is Windows 10 Enterprise, the other one is Windows 10 Enterprise, so they both match. So I'll click next here. And then destination directory name, I'll just say added to Win10, so that'll be created in the deployment share. And I'll click next, and that may take a while to complete, or it could take a while to complete. So again, I'll pause the recording and I'll start it up again once it finishes. Okay, so the importing just completed now. I'll click finish to there. And right here, we have the image that we imported into deployment share listed here. So the next thing I'll show is how to add drivers here. So I'll just be adding some drivers for demonstration here. But typically, again, if I bring up Google here, and if I type something like Lenovo driver packs, yeah. So yeah, type Lenovo driver packs, or you can even type Dell driver packs on Google, and it's going to take you to different pages. For example, the Lenovo one takes you to a page where you can download driver packages for Lenovo hardware. So, for example, I can download Windows 10 drivers for 32-bit, 64-bit for whatever Lenovo hardware that we're using. Same thing for Dell. You can download these cap files and then you can extract them into a folder and then import them either into MDT or SCCM. In this case, we're using MDT, so you can import that into MDT. So that's what you typically be using in a production environment, but just for demonstration, I'll create a new folder here and I'll call this IntelliPoint drivers. Go next to and then clicking on the driver, on the folder, I'll click import drivers. Again, the drivers are just all stored in a single folder. So what you typically have in your production environment is you have different folders for maybe Lenovo, and under that Lenovo folder you have subfolders for the different models of Lenovo that you have, or one folder for Dell and subfolders under that for the different Dell models that you have under that. It's advisable not to have too many variants of hardware models because then that makes things more complicated. But that's like in the planning phase. If you already have too many hardware models, you have no option but to import the drivers. So I'll go to learn this one, go to the E drive, on the lab files, on the model 2, on the drivers, on the point 64. And what this folder contains, actually, I'll just show you what it contains. So same thing. So this is like a similar situation. You download your Lenovo driver pack for your hardware model from Lenovo website or Dell's website. If it's Dell, you extract the cab. Wrong one. Okay. No, wrong one. Wrong one. Yep. So yeah, so this is what's under the folder. So I'll click next to that. And again, there's like one option here in case there are duplicates that already exist. Do you want it to import duplicates or do you want it to not import any duplicates? So typically, I'll say don't import any duplicates. And then, yeah, and that way we import the driver and that's finished now. So now we have the drivers imported there. Any driver located in that folder will be imported into MDT. So the next thing that we'll do is we'll customize something called the customsettings.ini. So let me bring up Paint for this. Let's bring up a new, let's cancel that. What I'll do is let's bring this up. So under MDT, you have two configuration files. So you have one called boot.ini and you have another one called customsettings.ini. Now, they're just ini files, which are basically just text files that contains different sections that you can add different values to. And so sorry, not boot.ini, it's called Bootstrap. So bootstrap.ini, what it provides is at the boot time, so MDT will use a boot image. So at the point when it's loading the boot image, it loads the bootstrap.ini file. And that's what will specify which deployment share to connect to. So if I go under MDT here, if I right click here and I go under properties, and then I can select which platforms I'm supporting, x86 or x64. So on the rules here, I can see bootstrap.ini here. So by default, you can see that's already pointing to my deployment share. So that's what specifies which deployment share you're connecting to. So I could go ahead and add all kinds of values here and specify the username and the password to use to connect to the deployment share and all kinds of settings I can specify in this INI file. But again, this will be stored in the boot image. So whenever you're creating the boot image, it should be stored in the boot image that will be loaded when the boot image is loaded on the client. Whereas this one here is called the custom settings.ini under the rules tab here. And this one is what's used to manage the deployment itself. So that will be something, some sort of like an equivalence to the unattended answer files that we created earlier when we're using Windows SIM. So sort of like that, but it manages like your whole deployment. So what we'll do is we just create a custom one um, that will help us in managing our deployment. You can see some of the settings here. And again, because this is not a theory lesson, it's just purely demo, you can just go on Google, just look for MDT custom settings.ini and you find lots of information online about this. So you find lots of information about which settings, um, options, yeah, just look for that. You'll find lots of information that'll tell you some settings that you can use. Different people have written like different blogs and different YouTube videos and that. So I'll just leave that for now. So what I'll do is I currently have one already created. Now not to waste time doing this. So I'll go Notepad. Let's open lab files. Mod 02 custom settings, yeah, and this is basically the one that we'll be using. So I'll just copy all these and again you can just read through this one and you can figure out exactly what it's talking about. So it's referring to the locale here. um, this is the priority that it's going to read the different sections. So it's going to read the section first, then it's going to read the default gateway section next, then it's going to read the by desktop section next, then it's going to read the default section. So it's just but that's for another forum to discuss all that. So again, I'll copy all this and I'll go under the rules tab, and in this case what I'll do is I'll go this one and I'll replace all that. And yeah, so I've added the customizations that I want here. Um, Again, this is not a forum for the explanation, but like as I mentioned, this shows the priority in which they'll be read and the settings will be read. So it reads this one next. So what it's saying is, hey, if the machine has a default gateway of 172.16.0.1, sign it to London, in which case it's going to read the settings on the London here, which will set the computer name location to this. If the default gateway is this, it will set the location to Glasgow, and then computer location name will be GLA. So computer location name will be used to specify this. So that will be computer location name. So in that case, it will be LON or GLA, and then computer type name. So basically, we're just using that to uh, automatically generate the computer name. That's for another forum. There's lots of stuff to discuss there. So created the custom settings there, click OK. But now this is like an important one because now we've added the settings that we want, and now we have to update the deployment share. Now when we do that, one thing to note that will happen if I go under the C drive and go under the deployment share folder itself, and if I go on the boot here, so you see this is empty. We've got nothing here. So Now I've made all these changes, but they've not been applied yet. So any changes you make in your deployment share in order to cause that to be applied, especially if you make anything that affects the boot image, you have to right click here and sorry, you have to right click the deployment share and you have to click update deployment share. So that's which is like the next thing and that we're gonna do. But before we do that, let's create a task sequence for. So the task sequence will be what we actually carry out the operating system deployment. So I'll go on the task sequence here and I'll click new task sequence. So again, you may want to create folders to organize this in your environment. So I'll give this an ID. So the ID is something that I decide. So it can be anything you decide it to be. And I'll call the task sequence deploy aded to Win 10 enterprise. Okay, I'll click next to that. Our different types of task sequences that we can select. For now, we just leave it at the standard client task sequence because what we're doing is we're actually just deploying something to a computer. We're not looking to replace or upgrade or capture. We're just looking to deploy something to a client computer. So I'll click next to that. So it's going to ask me, the next thing it's going to ask me is to select the operating system. I'll select the custom image that we imported and I'll click next to that. For the product key, I'll leave that for now. The full name of the account, of the local account I'll be creating, I'll set that to administrator. Organization, I'll set that to other term and I'll leave the Internet Explorer home page blank. I'll set the password for the administrator account. And I'll click next there. And I've created a task sequence, but just some changes in case I want to make changes to the task sequence. Like let's say in case of I have drivers that I want to add to this task sequence, I can go on the properties and on the properties I can click on the task sequence tab here. But in this case, the only change I want to make in this case. So I'll have another recording where I actually go into details with this. This is just, let's blitz this, go straight to the point, demonstrate how to use this in an enterprise. So what I'll do is I'll go on the pre-install, where it says inject drivers here. It says choose a driver selection profile, just set that to nothing. And when a driver has been installed, we're dealing with a virtual machine in this case. But let's say in a case of, let me click OK to this first. Yeah, so that's what it's referring to. So I can go new selection profile, call it telepoint drivers. Next, go to the out of box driver, select my IntelliPoint drivers and click next, next. And so under the task sequence, I can say, hey, which drivers do I want to install? Yep, select install the IntelliPoint drivers. It's going to select everything that's in that folder. So that's what that's referring to. So in this case, I'm saying nothing because I don't want any drivers because I'm dealing with a Hyper-V machine here. So now that I've done all this, I'm good to go. So what I'll do now is I'll right click the deployment share. I'll click update deployment share. I'll leave this settings as it is. I'll click next and I'll click next and then it's going to start the process. So what should happen is, you can see it's already starting to create the boot image. So it's going to create the boot image in itself by itself. So in the background, it's using Windows ADK for this part, but it's going to create the boot image. It's going to actually create the ISO of the boot image. And what we'll do at the end of this is we'll take the ISO that's created. We'll use that ISO to boot a client computer. In our case, that'll be LON client 6. So we'll use the ISO that's generated by MDT here. We'll use it to boot this computer, and within that ISO is the bootstrap.ini that tells it which deployment share to connect to. It's going to connect to deployment share, and then we can carry on. with our deployment. So what I'll do is I'll pause the recording again and I'll come back once this is completed. Okay, so that took a while to complete, but it's completed now. If I click finish to that, if I go to the deployment share the folder, now you can see I have my boot images all created by MDT. I didn't have to create them using copy PE. I didn't have to inject drivers into them manually, make customizations into them manually, all done by MDT. So what I'll do is I'll mount this boot image light and touch PEX64.iso. I'll mount it into Learn Client 6 and then I'll boot it up, and then what should happen is that should connect to my MDT deployment share, and I should be able to deploy the Windows 10 task sequence that I created. So let's do that now. Okay, so now Learn Client 6 is booting up with the boot image that I got from MDT, and see, now I'm connected to a deployment share. So that's where it's going to process what's in the bootstrap.ini, and then yeah, basically I can carry on with the deployment now. I can click run the deployment wizard. Now it needs to connect to the network share, so I'll specify my username and password. So I could include this in my custom settings.ini if I wanted to, but that's left to what your environment is like. If it's like a really secure environment where you don't want people deploying your images without your explicit permission, you may have to lock it down using something like this, where they have to enter a credential to be able to connect to the share. And that's now go OK, and that's connected, and it's processing the custom settings rule. Now I've got my task sequence here. I've selected the task sequence, so you can see deploy aded Windows 10 Enterprise. Click next to that. So for my computer name, I can say Learn Client 6. If I want, I can join it directly to the domain. Specify the domain to join to aded.com. If I leave this blank, it will just drop it in the default container hole you would have configured for Active Directory to drop computers into. So I'll leave that blank. It's using the same credential that I used earlier, and I'll click next to that. I'm not moving any data. It's a bare metal deployment, so I'll click next. I'm not restoring any data. I'll click next to that. I'll leave the local as it is, and you can expand that, and then you can click begin, and then the deployment begins. So that concludes this demonstration. At least that showed you so far how to create a custom boot image by yourself if you want to using Windows ADK, and then went ahead to create a custom answer file. And what we used that to do was to automate the deployment of a reference computer. And then the next thing we do was sysprep that reference computer and captured it. So using DISM, and then now we're deploying that custom image that we captured using MDT. So the goal of all this is at least you are familiar with all these different deployment tools. At some point in later demonstrations, I'll put all this together and show you how you can use this in a medium enterprise where you have multiple computers and you're using a more powerful tool like SCCM. So we'll get there, but at least it's laying the foundation for all these different methods that are available to you as an IT admin. So I hope this has been really helpful to you, and I'll see you in the next demonstration. Thanks very much. Bye.